Hi YouTube world, I'm Allie. Welcome to my channel and Happy New Year. So something that I've been binge watching lately on YouTube has been people's financial mistakes that they made in their 20s. Well, in this year, 2020, I will be turning 30 and completely wrapping up my 20s, and I thought that this was the perfect time to dive into the financial decisions that I had made when I was in my 20s. Bear with me because I am getting over a cold, so if my voice is a little raspy, I do apologize. So in talking about the financial decisions that I made, there were definitely consequences of that, and there was also a lot of benefits to the decisions that I made as well. So let's dive in. Okay, let's start when I was a little bit younger, more of like late teens or right before I hit 20. Work was really important to me. Like, school was just not, my grades were not there. I really just cared about working. I had like lower than low high school GPA. School just was not my thing. I didn't fit in. I was an introvert and I just wanted out. Work is where I really excelled. And I started working at a retail store when I was like 17 years old. It wasn't my first job, but it was my first retail job. So I started working there when I was 17. I actually worked another job at the same time, but that was more like admin-y job. But my retail job, I took so seriously. As in, I got promoted twice before I even hit college, and I was a young female supervising people a lot older than me when I was still a teenager, managing the money and all of that stuff. And it was hard. It was hard to make that decision that I wanted to be in charge, that I knew that my grades weren't great, so I really wanted to excel on my resume. I really wanted to have something to show my work ethic, show that I was more than just my grades, that I was a hard worker. And having that experience on my resume at a young age, I just thought was so important to me. But in doing that, I definitely sacrificed having friends at work. And since I spent so much time at work, I even did a work study during high school, so I worked more hours and went to school less. There's so much. And unfortunately, it's hard to be, in my opinion, to be a female who's a supervisor who's younger, because people don't want to hang out with a person that takes their job so seriously. They don't want to, go party with someone who's tough on them during the day. And the thing is, I had to be, because I had to be taken seriously for my age, for being a female. I almost felt like it was so much easier for the guys to kind of shoot the shiznit with people and still be respected. But with me, the few times I tried that, it was really like this difficult line where it's like you almost have to be kind of a bitch in a way. You almost have to be kind of, tougher in order to be taken seriously. So that was just my experience. So I did sacrifice kind of having more friends at work. I did come out with like some really strong friendships from there, but I definitely sacrificed having more of that social life and being invited to certain things because of that. I will say though, at the end of the day, it was completely worth it because I made more money in being a supervisor, and I did have to put myself through college, and I did work all through college. So it was definitely something that it worked out for me. I didn't have my mom and dad paying for college, so it was definitely something I needed to take seriously, and I couldn't just make the bare minimum wage forever. So I had to make that decision to not be as much of a kid, not have as much fun, and be taken seriously and work up. Which brings me to my next financial decision, college. So as I mentioned before, I didn't exactly have good grades in high school, so I didn't exactly qualify for a lot of scholarships or anything. So this is actually something that was really hard for me, but one of the deals that my parents had when I was growing up is that my dad was going to pay for college. Well, and the thing is with my dad paying for college is that, he had a lot of girlfriends and he helped them out financially with houses and cars and stuff, and he really didn't do the same for us to that degree. So one of the things was that he was going to pay for college. Now, my parents claimed me on their taxes, so when I filled out my financial aid, I didn't qualify for anything because of their income. It counted as mine because I was still dependent. So not qualifying for anything didn't really bother me. My dad was paying, so whatever. Go when tuition's due, my dad hands me a check, and lo and behold, it bounces. So tuition's due, I gotta figure out a plan. I didn't qualify for financial aid, so I was a naive, dumb, didn't know the world kid and didn't really have a lot of options because it was the day that tuition was due and it was the last day. I didn't know I was going to run into this problem. I did have money in savings because I legit spent nothing when I was working multiple jobs through high school. So I did have a good amount in savings. I did not have a private school's year tuition worth of savings, but I had enough that I could put some towards what I needed, but not much. Anyway, so I took out a loan. I knew nothing about loans. It had fluctuating interest. It was just, I had no idea what I was doing. I signed whatever they told me to because I didn't really have an option at the time. I didn't have time to research, and yeah, so that was a decision that I made. But I also would not have decided to go to a private school had I known that it was not going to be paid for. So you can't always trust people, and you got to look out for yourself. Which brings me to my next financial decision, and one that my older brother did not make and is still suffering from the consequences of his decision. Well, I decided to switch to a state school. I had taken out a hefty loan for my first year. I had paid some out of pocket, and it was just too crazy. I wouldn't be able to do it. I was really sad about this because for the first time in my life, I made so many friends living on campus in a dorm. It's just a different life than a commuter school, which is, you know, the state school that I went to was very much a commuter school. And it was really hard. I had so many friends at college, and even though I worked a lot, like there were just always people there, and it was really great. And for the first time, I didn't feel so lonely, even being my introverted self. So I was really sad to go into that, but luckily I did meet a boyfriend right away that I was with for like 4+ years, so that helped, but that's neither here nor there. So I went to a state school, which I could afford, and I didn't need to continue taking out loans as long as I worked like 32-ish hours a week, give or take, depending on the week, because with retail it fluctuates. Unfortunately, because I did my job too well, I was almost always given a lot of hours, which wasn't always good because I also doubled up on classes. I didn't double up. That's a lie. I took extra classes, which you had to maintain a certain GPA in order to qualify for that and get approval for. I had amazing grades in college. It's like completely changed. I was paying for it. I cared about what I was learning, and I wanted a future for myself. So I even ended up getting a merit scholarship on my last year for academic excellence. So I was really proud of myself for kicking it into gear and for working so hard. What I gave up though is having a life. As a commuter, I was about an hour away each way, maybe a little less, more like 45 minutes each way, depending on traffic, of course. But I really didn't have a life. I took a lot of classes because every year tuition was going up, so I wanted to graduate early in order to not pay the increased tuition prices. Yes, I am that crazy when it came to that because I was so scared of the financial burden that I was going to have to face. So I did make those decisions in order to try and give myself a easier time when I came out of college, especially because I was going to college during the recession, and it was the worst time to come out of college and graduate college, and it took me a long time to find a job. But going to a state school really helped with not having like this massive loan debt. I think my brother has about $150,000 in debt, and I did not come out with that much. I had my first year of the major debt, and the rest I ended up paying out of pocket by working an insane amount of hours. I never slept. I worked so hard. All right, coming out of college, I am officially in my 20s at this point. I graduated when I was like 21 years old, and given the time it was with the recession, no one was really hiring. So the job that I found, which was like about 7 months after I graduated, I finally found a job making not that much more than I was making in retail, and it was also like an hour and a half away, but I needed the experience. I needed to work in more of a corporate environment in order to work ahead. So the sacrifices that you do, it was like an hour, hour and a half each way, depending on the time of day. My commute was insane. I had moved back in with my parents after a breakup, and my commute was just absolutely crazy. I was driving a really old car. It was a Honda CR-V. It was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know how old, but it had so much work that needed to be done that it was actually cheaper to put a down payment on a new car than to keep fixing all the problems. So that brings me to my next financial decision. I ended up buying a brand new Prius. Yeah, maybe that sounds kind of crazy to a lot of people, but there was a lot of thought that went into this decision. I had a really long commute, which meant that gas was insane, especially at that time. I don't even remember what it was, but I know my CRV, it was just this gas guzzler where I was filling up my tank about every other day, but that was mostly because I had a lot wrong with it too. I really had to factor in gas in my decision. And I also had to factor in, monthly payments, of course, and maintenance fees and everything. Well, Toyota was having a great deal where I was able to get like 3 years of maintenance paid for just by getting the new car, and they had a great finance plan at the time, so I didn't have any credit, so I did get like a really high interest rate, but that's okay. I was planning on paying it off even faster, my student loans, which I did. So that was my decision behind getting that car. It was great on mileage. It got 48 city and 52 highway, somewhere around there. So it was really good for what I needed, and I didn't have to worry about it breaking down. It was reliable. My job was really strict about, 3 strikes and you're out. So I didn't want to have like car issues and being late. You had to clock in. So that was something that was important to me. In order to pay for my student loans and my brand new car, I worked overtime at my job. I was very fortunate that my job offered overtime, but there were weeks where I would do 62, 65-hour weeks. That was not easy, especially with how far the commute was. I feel like I didn't have a life at all. I had a boyfriend that I never saw. We had just like gotten back together, but it was kind of rocky. It was gonna eventually end, but I didn't have time for anything. I was so far away from where I worked. I had so much debt that I needed to pay and focus on, and I just wanted to pay it down. So I worked so many hours to get there. I really sacrificed having a life in my early 20s just to try and ease my life later. So when it came to things like getting my nails done or going to the movies or going to restaurants, these were not things that I did in my early 20s at all. I did not make enough for those luxuries. That at the end of the day, they are luxuries, and I really cared about building the life that I wanted, and I wasn't there yet. I was still entry level and I needed to grow. That being said, I still had a fluctuating interest student loan on top of my fancy car payments. So did I need to get a Prius? No. Do I regret my decision in getting a Prius? Absolutely not. I still think it was the best option for me, and I'm very happy with it. It has never had a problem. I didn't have to pay maintenance for a while, and it really got me to and from work, and I really didn't have to worry about paying too much in gas or any of that, and I absolutely loved it. So I did not regret that decision. It was really expensive and really tight for a while. But in making my decision to focus on working so much and paying off my debt in my early 20s, I really emphasized sacrificing having a life. And the few friends that I did have, they were always trying to convince me to travel. They would always tell me oh, it's so important, their memories, money will always come, all these things, it's so good for your soul, and we've worked hard, we deserve it. I never felt that way. And I will say to this day, and they did go on these trips, and I was so jealous in the moment that I couldn't go because I didn't have the money to go, and I didn't want to deal with the financial burden of coming back and realizing if shit hits the fan and all of my savings has gone to a trip that I didn't need right then I just couldn't handle even the thought of that. And I will say those very friends that tried to get me on those trips, they aren't doing well to this day. They actually still have credit card debt from trips that they took in their early 20s, right out of college. So that was my decision, and it was really hard, and I did want to travel, but it was easier for me to just pretend I didn't want to travel than to admit that I was missing out on things. But it was hard. It was not this easy decision to make, but for me it was the right decision to make. It didn't mean I was never going to travel. It just meant that I didn't feel like the world owed me travel right out of school. I didn't put in my time. I mean, of course I was working hard, but I still had a ways to go before I was financially secure enough to give myself those luxuries. Another financial related decision that I made in my 20s was to not stay at dead-end jobs but I was never really going to make more than your slow growing rate every year, no matter how good you did at your job. At a certain point, you have to realize that, you know, you can stay and be comfortable, or you can put yourself out of your comfort zone and take a risk. And some of those risks landed me in situations that I didn't exactly love, but I grew from them, I learned from them. It was something to put on my resume, and every like 1 to 2 years I actually moved jobs, and because of doing that, my salary increased drastically. If I had stayed in those other jobs, I would not be making what I make now. And plus, having all the different experiences and all the different industries and growing each time, it really made me more valuable in my next job because I had all of this experience. I was adaptable, I learned new tools constantly, so I was very like on my toes and ready for anything in my new job. So I really think that that was the smartest move to do, both for my skills professionally and for my financial situation. Something that did happen in my 20s, which was very unfortunate, but I turned it into a positive, was my car, that my Prius that I bought. I had paid it off pretty quickly after I bought it because I put everything towards it. I got hit by a truck and it totaled my car. It was horrible. It was devastating, but I couldn't just sit and dwell, so I, took it as it was and did what I had. So insurance cut me a check for my car, and what I decided to do is, since I still had my fluctuating interest with my student loan debt, I took everything that I had left in savings, I put it towards my student loan and paid off the remainder with what the insurance had given me for my car. I really lucked out with the timing because I was able to work from home for a couple weeks while I researched the new car situation, and I was able to find a fantastic deal on a new Prius with 0 down and 0% interest. So I traded my fluctuating student interest, not knowing what I was paying every month, for a 0% interest car. It did take me a long time to pay off that car, but I did get that paid off in my 20s. Actually, I think that was just last year that I paid that off. Paying off my debt was something that I prioritized in my 20s. Another financial decision that I made in my 20s was to buy a condo instead of renting. I was very much pushed into the decision to buy a condo, and I did have to make the decision pretty quickly just because of some of my life circumstances. My parents did not want me living at home, so it wasn't really an option to stay. So I bought a condo in my mid-20s, and it was a fantastic decision because where I live, the rent is really high, and actually paying like your first month security and last month for an apartment was pretty much what I put for my down payment of a condo, and it was going towards my condo, which I own. And in a few years after owning it, I moved in with my now fiance, and I rented out to a tenant, so my mortgage is being paid for. So it was a great financial decision to make. I was able to find someone who had a very similar mindset with money, and he owns a multifamily and rent out a floor in his place that we live in now. So that was a decision that we both made in our 20s that I think worked out really good. And I'm really proud of myself with where I am, and I'm proud that I'm able to afford nice things and have nice things, and I'm so blessed for the opportunities that I've been given, and I'm so grateful for all that I have. My financial decisions that I made in my 20s were not easy to do. I do think it was the right thing for me to do. Everyone's life is different. Some people can have college paid for and live at home for years, and it's not a problem, but for my life and my circumstances, I'm proud of where I am, because now when I buy myself something and I treat myself, I feel like I really deserve it. I really put in my time. I don't feel guilty. And I mean, not that anyone should, even if you didn't have those same circumstances. Everyone's life is different. We each have our cross to bear, and it's not up to me or anyone else to judge, but those are the decisions that I had made in my 20s that really helped me, and it helped me have the life that I am so happy and grateful and blessed to have now. So, also, side note with buying luxury items is that you can resell them and get a good chunk of your money back, if not even more, depending on what the item is. So there's definitely benefits to having a more, luxury lifestyle when it comes to shopping. Those were my financial decisions in my 20s. Feel free to share your thoughts down below, And thank you so much for watching. Bye.